Hello, Bob Rietfeld here, preaching and teaching minister of the Spring Hill Christian Church of rural Oak Lockney, Georgia. And welcome to another study in prophecy and stuff in the end times as it relates to the end times. And I want to just start off by letting you know I've been on vacation. We went back to Iowa to visit family, and thus the reason why it's been 2 or 3 weeks since our last lesson. Our lesson was lesson number 6. This is lesson number 7, and more stuff about Bible prophecy and the end times. And we started talking in this particular lesson. The last time we met was Israel in prophecy. And as I said back then, I'll say again, this particular lesson on Israel in prophecy is very, very long. And so I've divided it into 3 lessons actually. And so the last lesson that we put up here was the first part. And that was concerning that you must know what the Bible itself says about the nature of prophecy. And we talked about that a little bit. And today what we're going to do is we're going to continue that last section of more stuff in Bible prophecy and end times on the study of Israel in prophecy. And the title of today's lesson is You Must Know Bible History. I want to reiterate, as I have in the past, that all this information that I'm sharing with you comes from information about prophecy from Dr. Jack Cottrell, specifically in his book, From Now to Eternity, Prophecy in the End Times, from a greater collected writings of Jack Cottrell, volume number 12. Printed by the Christian Restoration Association, and this is where I get all of this material from. I took numerous classes in theology and doctrine at the Cincinnati Christian University years ago under the tutelage of Dr. Jack Cottrell. And so I am sharing with you some of the things that I've learned, the things out of his book, and I wanted to make sure that I give him the full credit for this. It's true that much of the Old Testament's prophecy about Israel is meant to be fulfilled in the physical nation of Israel. But what seems to be missed by many is that such prophecies, as they apply to the physical nation, have already been fulfilled, mostly in Old Testament history itself. Now, when I see, how so many prophecies about Israel are waiting yet to be fulfilled in the future, it makes you wonder if those who think this have much knowledge of Bible history at all. And so I would say that if you want to interpret Bible prophecy correctly, then you have to know Bible history. And so we can affirm that the Old Testament contains many prophecies about the physical nation of Israel, and we can affirm that many of these prophecies are intended to be fulfilled literally on the level of physical reality. And these particular points are not disputed. The real question, though, is whether or not such prophecies have already been fulfilled. And this is a major misunderstanding of prophecies, since many fail to recognize that most of the prophecies about physical Israel were fulfilled in Old Testament history. There have been, I've heard and listened to many people who read the prophecies about Israel's tribulation or the rebuilding of the temple, and who assume that the prophecies are still waiting to be fulfilled at some time in the future. The fact is, however, most of the prophecies that refer to such things as Israel's possession of Canaan, their captivity, and their return to the homeland have already been fulfilled, as Old Testament history clearly shows us. So now, what I want to do then is to cite some of the main Old Testament prophecies and promises about Israel and show from the Old Testament records how they have already been fulfilled. First of all, God promised to give the land of Canaan to the Israelite nation. In Genesis 12, verse 7, God said to Abraham, "To your descendants I will give this land." And this promise is then repeated later in Genesis chapter 17 and verse 8, where it says, "I will give to you and to your descendants after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan for an everlasting possession." And you can read further things about that in Genesis chapter 13, chapter 15, chapter 19, 26, and 28. There are just a lot of other passages. Now, this promise was kept by God, by Yahweh, it was kept when God used Moses to lead the Israelites out of Egyptian captivity and to deliver them to this promised land. And that happened around 1400 BC. After the nation had wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, and just as they stood poised ready to cross over the Jordan River, which lay before them, Moses gave them these words from God. "See, I have placed the land before you. Go in and possess the land which the Lord swore to give to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to them and their descendants after them." Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 8. Once they arrived in Canaan, Joshua chapter 21, verse 43 and 45 records this fulfillment of the promise. "So the Lord gave Israel all the land which he had sworn to give to their fathers, and they possessed it and lived in it, and not one of the good promises which the Lord had made to the house of Israel failed. All came to pass." Notice that last part, all came to pass. Some people are misled about this by a faulty translation of Genesis 17:18, which says in the New American Standard Bible that the land of Canaan would be an everlasting possession of the Jews. Many of the translations translate the Hebrew word olam either with everlasting or with other terms such as forever or eternal, implying that such possession would never end. This is just simply not true. That is not a good interpretation or a translation, of that particular word. In certain forms, the word can mean this, but it can also mean indefinitely perpetual, ongoing, or continuing, or enduring. But it does not have to mean forever or everlasting. And so in reference to matters regarding Old Testament Israel, it should not be so understood and translated that way. So the reason that we know this is all we have to do is to survey some of the other Old Testament items regarding the life and religion of Israel, all of which are described with this same Hebrew word, olam. A sample list of things that the Old Testament says will belong to Israel, olam. Circumcision in Genesis 17, we know that does not last forever. The Passover feast in Exodus, we know that doesn't last forever. The temple candlestick, the priesthood, the priest's clothing, the priest's portion of the sacrifices, the priest's washings, the Day of Atonement, the bread of the sanctuary or the shewbread, the Sabbath day, Solomon's temple, Levites as custodians of the Ark of the Covenant. The word translated for olam means for a long, continuing time, ongoing, enduring, but not everlasting or forever. And we know that that's not the case with these. The question is this then: when God instituted these items and practices for the nation of Israel, did he intend for them to last literally forever? And the answer is no, he did not. we know from the New Testament that circumcision, the Sabbath, Passover, the Day of Atonement, and everything that has to do with the Old Testament priesthood came to an end when Jesus came and died to establish the new covenant. We can see especially in Galatians, Ephesians, and Hebrews talks about those specifically. But the word in the Hebrew Old Testament used to describe all of these items, olam, is the same one used to describe Israel as God's people and Israel's possession of the land of Canaan in the that we just talked about. These latter items are no more forever than circumcision or priesthood. Rather, they were all meant to be age-lasting, not everlasting. In other words, they were to continue until the end of the Old Testament age, but were not to extend into the age of the church. So why does the Bible describe them as everlasting or as lasting forever? It's simply a bad English translation of the word olam, perhaps influenced by certain theological biases. In some of the more recent translations, in many of those scripture references that I just mentioned, olam is translated with words such as perpetual, lasting, continuing, and these would be more appropriate translations, especially in Genesis 13:15 and Genesis 17:8, Exodus 32:13, and 2 Samuel 7, verse 24. The point is, the Old Testament prophecy and promises do not support the belief that the Jews are God's people forever, or that they are meant to possess the land of Canaan forever. We've looked at how in Bible history, God promised to give the land of Canaan to the Israelite nation, but it was not to be forever. God prophesied that disobedient Israel would go into captivity and be separated from their land. The long passage in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 15 through 68 is devoted to this sad prophecy. And so let's look at verses 15 and then 63 through 65. But it shall come about, if you do not obey the Lord your God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes, with which I charge you today, that all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. It shall come about that as the Lord delighted over you to prosper you and multiply you, so the Lord will delight over you to make you perish and destroy you, and you will be torn from the land where you are entering to possess it. Moreover, the Lord will scatter you among all peoples from one end of the earth to the other end of the earth, and there you shall serve other gods. And then in verse 63 through 65, among those nations you shall find no rest, and there will be no resting place for the sole of your foot. But there the Lord will give you a trembling heart, failing of eyes, and despair of soul. We can look in Deuteronomy chapter 29, verses 22 through 29, and Joshua chapter 23, verses 15 and 16. These prophecies were fulfilled more than once, their final fulfillment being about 586 BC when the Babylonian armies conquered Jerusalem and razed it and the temple to the ground and took many of the surviving Jews into captivity in Babylon. This fulfillment is recorded in 2 Kings 24:10 through chapter 25, verse 21. And the following words are from 2 Kings 24:10 and chapter 25, 8 through 11, and verse 21. It says, at that time, the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, went up to Jerusalem, and the city came under siege. Now on the 7th day of the 5th month, which was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, a servant of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He burned the house of the Lord, the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem, even every great house he burned with fire. So all the army of the Chaldeans who were with the captain of the guard broke down the walls around Jerusalem. Then the rest of the people who were left in the city, and the deserters who had deserted to the king of Babylon, and the rest of the people, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carried away into exile. So Judah was led away into exile from its land. You can also read the entire book of Lamentations, which describes the destruction of Jerusalem. Then God prophesied Israel's return to their homeland. And we can look at the prophecies again, first in Deuteronomy 30, verses 1 through 5, then from Jeremiah 29, 13 and 14. Then the Lord your God will restore you from captivity and have compassion on you, and you will gather again from all the peoples where the Lord your God has scattered you. If your outcasts are at the ends of the earth, from there the Lord your God will gather you, and from there he will bring you back. The Lord your God will bring you into the land which was your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it. And he will prosper you and multiply you more than your fathers. You will seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and I will restore your fortunes and will gather you from all the nations and from all the places where I have driven you, declares the Lord. And I will bring you back to the place from where I sent you into exile. And you can look in Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. Many people think these prophecies only recently began to be fulfilled and that parts have not yet been fulfilled. Especially the rebuilding of Jerusalem's main building, the temple. You can, Hal Lindsey's book references that we talked about in the last lesson. What they're overlooking is the fact that in 536 BC, Israel did return to her homeland from Babylonian captivity. And beginning at that point, rebuilt the city of Jerusalem and ultimately the temple itself. These prophecies were fulfilled in Old Testament history. See 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verses 22 and 23. Now, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he sent a proclamation throughout his kingdom and also put it in writing, saying, "Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever there is among you of all his people, may the Lord his God be with him, and let him go up." This is recorded in more detail in Ezekiel chapter 1, verses 1 through 11. God specifically prophesied the rebuilding of the Jerusalem temple. The captives would not just return to their homeland and rebuild the city and their own dwellings, they would also rebuild the temple of God. And here's what Isaiah 44:28 says King Cyrus would do. "It is I who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he will perform all my desire. And he declares of Jerusalem, she will be built. And of the temple, your foundation will be laid." Ezekiel 37 verses 21 through 28 is a great prophecy of Israel's return, ending with this reference to the rebuilding of the temple. "My dwelling place also will be with them, and I will be their God, and they will be my people. And the nations will know that I am the Lord who sanctifies Israel when my sanctuary is in their midst forever." Ezekiel 37 verses 27 and 28. The fulfillment of this prophecy took a while, but the temple was indeed rebuilt when Israel returned from Babylonian captivity. And as soon as they returned in 536 BC, they immediately laid the foundation for it, but got distracted with their own affairs and neglected it for the next 20 years. Then God sent the prophet Haggai to rebuke them and to command them to finish the job that they had started, which they did in 516 BC. You can read it in Haggai chapter 1, verses 1 through 12. The result is recorded in Ezra chapter 6, verses 14 and 15. And the elders of the Jews were successful in building through the prophesying of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the son of Iddu. And they finished building according to the command of God of Israel and the decree of Cyrus. This temple was completed on the third day of the month of Adar. The most important prophecy fulfilled by physical Israel was the first coming of Jesus Christ, the first coming of the Christ. This was God's original purpose for Israel. This is why there was a Jewish nation in the first place. In the very beginning, Genesis chapter 12:3, God said to Abraham, "And in you all the families of the earth will be blessed." This promise was repeated to Jacob, Genesis 26:4, "By your descendants all the nations of the earth shall be blessed." It was repeated to Isaac in Genesis 28:14, "In you and in your descendants shall all the families of the earth be blessed." At many other places in the Old Testament, the first coming of the Messiah was prophesied. And as a result, Jesus Christ was called the hope of Israel, found in Acts chapter 28, verse 20. All these prophecies and promises were fulfilled, and Israel's whole purpose as a special people of God was completed when Jesus entered the world as Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham, Matthew chapter 1:1. Paul says also in Romans 9, verses 4 and 5, that God chose the Jews, to whom belongs the adoption as sons, and the glory and the covenants, and the giving of the law, and the temple service, and the promises, whose are the fathers, and from whom is the Christ, according to the flesh, who is over all, God blessed forever. Amen. Paul also says in Acts chapter 13, verses 32 and 33, that the first coming of Jesus was the wrap-up of God's business with Israel as a physical nation. And we preach to you the good news of the promise made to the fathers, that God has fulfilled this promise to our children in that he raised up Jesus. And we can also look in Luke chapter 24, verses 44 through 47, and Acts chapter 26, verse 22 and 23. And at the time of Jesus' death, AD 30, God retired physical Israel from service, from his service. The temple veil was torn in two, indicating that God's presence was no longer localized in Israel's temple. Matthew 27:51, "And behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom." Thus, the entire Old Testament system ended at Christ's first coming. Everything physical Israel existed for was fulfilled with the first coming of Jesus. And her role was preparation for that event. And since that for which she was preparing has come, there is no longer a reason in God's plan for Israel's separate existence as a nation. Now, as a result, God no longer makes a distinction between Jews and Gentiles. Romans 10:12 through 13, "For there is no distinction between Jew and Greek, for the same Lord is Lord of all, abounding in riches for all who call on him, for whoever will call on the name of the Lord will be saved. Galatians 3:28, there is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. There is no distinction between Greek and Jew, circumcised and uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave and freeman, but Christ is all and in all. Colossians 3:11. So that wraps up today's part about how you really have to know Bible history in order to truly understand the nation of Israel in prophecy and the distinction between the reality of physical Israel and what we'll talk about spiritual Israel next week. And that's what we're going to call next week's part of this lesson, the overall lesson of Israel in Bible prophecy. Next week's section is titled, You Must Understand That All Reality is Not Physical, especially regarding Israel. So I hope you have enjoyed today's lesson section on Israel in prophecy. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have enjoyed presenting it to you. I hope you will join me again next week as we conclude the lesson portions about Israel in prophecy. I hope you have a great rest of the week, and may God bless you.